Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so Batman fans are probably gonna hate me after this video because I think that what we're gonna do here is make a pretty compelling case of why Batman is a terrible superhero. So with the city of Bane, of course, we picked up in the first video that basically what we saw was like the fall of Batman, right? The fall of Bruce Wayne, and in his place, Thomas Wayne essentially took over as Batman in Gotham City. Now, for those of you guys who are playing catch up here, I invite you guys to watch the videos down in the description. They'll get you totally caught up on everything that's going on. But the idea, and really kind of the big question people had to ask was, if Gotham City had been taken over by Bane, and if all those various villains who sided with Bane became the new law enforcement arm of Bane's city, and then those villains who chose not to, or those heroes who were there, were either captured, interned, or else, imprisoned or what have you, then how is the rest of the country interpreting that? How does the rest of the country deal with that? How does Metropolis deal with that, where Superman's at? How do they view that? And this is a cool thing, because what ends up happening here is we're basically met by the arrival of Captain Atom. Now, for those of you guys who are playing catch up here, when it comes to Captain Atom, there have been a couple different iterations of his character. There's the original that appeared back in Space Adventures, I think it was. Back in 1960s, it was created by Charlton Comics. For those of you guys who don't know, Charlton Comics was a comic book publisher alongside Marvel and DC at the time, or really even before Marvel. It was largely DC, and then Charlton and a couple other comic book publishers were releasing stories. Again, all this really kind of came out of Barry Allen, the idea that Barry Allen was the first attempt to blend science fiction with superhero themes and like create an origin story that was rooted in both. But because of the success of Barry Allen, because of the success of the Flash, he basically got a whole bunch of science-based heroes. And that was the nature of Alan Atom back in the day. Now, after the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths, going into like 1987, DC came back and introduced like a new version of his character named Nathaniel Atom. But the overall gist of this is that Captain Atom is a guy who can like manipulate pretty much an infinite amount of energy and then channel that energy in a variety of ways. But the overall point here is that when it comes to his character, Captain Atom's a heavy hitter. And for the most part, he's like a government guy. The idea behind this is that if Captain Atom shows up, then usually it seems to indicate that like things are going to pop off or something's going to take place designed to sort of elevate a character, right? Because this is a guy that can go toe to toe with Superman, and depending on what stories you're reading, can actually overpower Superman. So it really sort of depends on there. But this basically picks up with Gotham Girl. Now, the cool thing about this is that with this event unfolding with Gotham Girl, it is kind of an interesting question. What would happen if Gotham Girl faced off against someone who is as immensely powerful as Captain Atom? And the answer to this is that she absolutely beats the tar out of him. She absolutely thrashes him. And that's kind of the funny thing, because remember, when it comes to Gotham Girl, her powers are basically sort of ambiguous, right? It's one of these things that was never really cleared up. It's just the idea that she, basically traded a portion of her life force, or at least allows her life force to be drained based on how much power she uses, right? So like absolute power, quote unquote, like whatever that power happens to be. Now, by and large, it seems to follow the form and function of your standard run-of-the-mill abilities, right? So like flight, super speed, durability, different things like that. But the result is that the more she uses her powers, the more she strains them, the more of her life she loses. And so facing off against someone like Captain Atom is not a small thing. Like that's a pretty significant chunk of energy for her to use because he's such a heavy hitter. But she absolutely like trashes him. She rips him to pieces. Now, what's also kind of interesting about this is that Tom King tries to sort of build this scenario where Gotham is essentially in the midst of a civil war. The heroes and the villains versus those villains who have been turned to the side of Bane or joined the side of Bane willingly. And in all reality, here's one of the issues that you run into, right? Like when it comes to trying to build a kind of civil war, or like a story that basically says like everything's sort of blowing up, it's kind of hard to do that when the stakes don't really seem that high, which is to say the characters who could die don't really seem that important in the first place, right? Like when it comes to the character of Gotham Girl, she's largely been a background character really up until this point. She played a big role in the first arc, and now she's playing a role in this arc, but there's nothing that really kind of ties you in and really kind of brings you to sort of feel for her character or want to be a part of that whole landscape that she's with. When you switch over to a scenario where you've got Kite Man, you've got Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and then you've got Scarecrow, you're essentially talking about villains that, aside from Scarecrow, aren't really all that interesting in the first place. And so like when one of the Tweedle brothers gets shot, and then you end up having the father of Bruce Wayne, who essentially was the one who pulled the trigger, right? Like Thomas Wayne from the Flashpoint universe, who's the one that pulled the trigger and shot him. Then it's just kind of like, okay, I mean, I guess it's interesting, because usually when it comes to trying to create a situation where you're sort of showing stakes that it's like, if we lose, everything falls, it kind of requires a whole bunch of characters that people care about, right? Like, look at Marvel Civil War, for example. Like, you look at Marvel Civil War, and it was the entirety of the superhero community. But what made it so impactful is that it was everyone, from the very, very top heroes like Iron Man and Captain America and so on, all the way down to the lower level heroes like Tigra, who basically quit because she's a college kid. She's like, I don't have time to get involved in this whole Civil War and go to college. I just don't have time for that. You know, it was all the small little nooks and crannies. In order to really do something like this, what you would need is a big event. Otherwise, it just kind of seems like things are happening in Gotham and it's business as usual, when in reality, this story's not. This story is about Bane taking over the entirety of Gotham City, which is a huge thing. But the result is that the way it's written, it kind of seems to sort of fly by and then not a whole lot of notice gets it, and that's basically it. And the story's done and we move on to the next gag. And so it's kind of like, kind of takes away, it takes away for a little bit, and it kind of sucks. But you have this really cool moment where you end up having like Catwoman. Right now, Catwoman being around and Catwoman being part of the Batman story, for the most part, was kind of like, remember, she's a victim here, right? The idea was that she actually wanted to marry Bruce Wayne, but through Bane's machinations, he essentially used a friend of Selina Kyle to trick Selina into believing that the only way Bruce Wayne could be happy is if he was Batman. That if she were to marry him and she were to ask him to walk away, and they went and pursued whatever goals it is they wanted to pursue, tour Europe for the rest of their lives, the result was that she'd actually be taking away from happiness. And so she walked away from it. But in learning the truth about the situation and learning what's really going on here, we end up finding out she's the one who rescued Bruce Wayne. That when Bruce was left at the bottom of this cavern, by Thomas Wayne, she's the one that picked him up, she's the one that found him, she's the one that brought him here. And, we saw that in the last video. And now you have it kind of playing out where he's just recovering in her house. And it's kind of a cool little moment here, but again, it just doesn't really seem impactful. It doesn't really just seem like, man, I'm so glad this is going on. It's just kind of like, cool. And then you just kind of go on. And so it's interesting. I don't really mean to do that to tear Tom King down. What I mean to say here is that this may be one of these things that the entire run of Tom King may be one of those things where it kind of reads better in trade. But when you go like story by story, you go issue by issue, it doesn't feel so cohesive. Maybe it's just this one particular comic, because for the most part, I've loved his run up until this point. So maybe it's just this one particular thing. But what he does here is he actually puts pretty cool emphasis on the character of Kite Man. Now, Kite Man was for the most part like not even a Z-list villain, like whatever's lower than Z, right? So like an AA villain, if you're following the Excel spreadsheet formula. He's like a below Z villain. This is a guy that's like almost totally and completely irrelevant and doesn't really have anything to do with anybody. But the cool thing about Kite Man is like he flies around, he's just like, Kite Man, hell yeah, like it's cool. Like it's one of the coolest little things. He originally appeared back in the War of Jokes and Riddles, I'm pretty sure. But basically, like, it's kind of a ragtag thing. Now, this I think does an exceedingly good job of showing us how dire things are, right? Like under normal circumstances, you would never see Scarecrow spending time and socializing with someone like Kite Man. I mean, that's just, it would, even for Scarecrow, he'd be like, I mean, you're cool, man, but like you don't really belong at the cool kids table. Like, go sit with the other guys over there. Like the cool kids are hanging out and we're all gonna skip class and we're all gonna go to like make out point. I don't know. I don't know what kids do these days, but what it does is it sets things up really, really well, right? Because Gotham is really kind of walking a knife's edge. And when that happens, when that unfolds, what you're doing here is you're giving us a scenario where you're essentially saying like, everybody's really just kind of banding together as best they can. Like at this point, there is no differentiation when it comes to like classes of villains. It's basically those individuals who have been like taken over to Bane's side and those who don't want to, those who are trying to kind of keep Gotham a relatively safe place. And so it's interesting because then you switch over and you suddenly start getting these members of the Bat family who are having these conversations with each other, right? I mean, they're kind of having these talks. You have Damian Wayne who's talking to Tim Drake, and it's cool the way this happens because what you get here is a sort of explanation on whether or not things are right. And this is where I say, I think a lot of Batman fans may end up disagreeing with me here, because when I look at the city of Gotham, you look at the Batman comics, and you look at the city of Gotham, and it's like Batman's a crappy hero. Because if Batman was a good hero, Gotham wouldn't be bad. There would be a measured change with Gotham improving, but that's never happened. In fact, because of Batman, now you've got like the Joker, who was really Batman's own creation. You've got Two-Face, you've got the Penguin, you've got like Scarecrow, you got Killer Croc. You have all these characters out, these supervillains who didn't exist before Batman. So what Batman had done, what Bruce had done, is his parents got shot. His mommy and daddy got shot. He got upset. He went and traveled the world to make sure that nobody had to deal with that again. And he said the best way to do it is to come back to Gotham and make things worse. And that's basically what's happened. And it's kind of a cool situation here because this whole debate that goes on between Damian Wayne and Tim Drake is this question of, are things really bad though? I mean, sure, like people are being stripped of their free will, all that kind of good stuff, and they're being made to serve on behalf of Bane, but the city's better. What's the alternative? Give them their free will back and watch the whole city fall apart again? I mean, that's kind of the cool thing. that's kind of this cool debate. That's why I love these debates so much. Is because, you know, people will kind of say, well, they should definitely have their free will. I mean, I guess if you just want to watch the city fall apart, but if the people of Gotham City had the ability to make their city a better place, they would have. Either they've chosen not to, or they've been incapable of doing it, but regardless of the circumstance, they failed on all levels. And so because of that, like, somebody else has to come in and force their hand and say, if you're not going to do it, then I'll do it myself. And that's what Bane did. That's essentially what Bane did. He came in, took over the city, and like, it's kind of a cool thing because like, there's no real crime anymore. The only people you have to worry about, the only people that are being tracked down by the forces of Bane are the villains who haven't sided with them or haven't been caught and turned over to them yet, right? But you look at a scenario like this and people say, well, individuals, you know, they deserve their free will. What they're really saying is the city deserves to rot. The city deserves to fall apart because that's what's going to happen, because that's what always has happened. And that's because no one's taken any steps to keep that from happening. I mean, even Batman made it worse, right? Like, I mean, you kind of have a hero here, a vigilante or a hero or anti-hero, whatever you want to call it, who says, look at these guys who are incorrigible and there's really no reason for them to stop doing what they're doing. But gosh golly, I just believe that if I arrest them enough times, they'll stop. You know, I can fix them. I can rehabilitate them. No, he can't. Batman's a failure as a superhero because Batman's not willing to do what needs to be done in order to make sure that the villains are stopped. And that's why Bane works, because he is. The guy who wins the war is the guy who's willing to do what the other person isn't. Even if it means selling your humanity, even if it means giving up your humanity, either that or it's an endless war that will go on forever. And that's really kind of the way that Gotham is. It's an endless conflict that goes on forever and ever and ever because Batman's inept and a failure as a superhero. And that's why I say, I think Batman fans will hate me because of that, but it doesn't mean I'm wrong. And that's kind of the funny thing about this, is because it's just sort of this kind of discussion, right? The Bat family cannot go into Gotham City. If they do that, Bane will kill Alfred. And so because of the fact that they're not willing to sacrifice the life of Alfred, then they're saying, well, then we'll just kind of let things keep going as they're going, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you got to choose a side. Everybody's got to draw straws. Somebody's going to get the short one. And in this instance, it's Alfred. I mean, the guy's old. He's almost done with all his living anyway, so why does it really matter? But if I'm a member of the Bat family, I'm saying, hey, look, Alfred's one man. There's a city with millions of people that need to be saved or whatever it is that needs to happen or something like that. Like, we need to act. Sorry about your luck, Alfred. It's been real and it's been good. You just got to cut him loose. And that's just the way it goes. It's harsh, but people with soft spots don't win wars. And so it's kind of cool, you know, when it comes to this conflict here, because what you end up having is sort of Thomas Wayne talking to Gotham Girl and asking her, tell me what you hear. Like what do you hear in the city of Gotham? And she's like, I don't hear anybody calling the police. I don't hear anybody calling for help. I don't hear anybody getting mugged. I don't hear any of those things. I hear a quiet city. I hear a peaceful city. I hear a city that's better than it's ever been under the rule of Bruce Wayne. And that's why it's awesome. It's because at the end of the day, Bane succeeded. Bane did what he wanted to do. Bane made Gotham a better place. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.